It was a sunny afternoon, the kind of day that made everything seem possible. But for Nathaniel James, the world had never seemed more unfair. A young black man, struggling to find his footing in a city that never quite felt like home, Nathaniel had always been overlooked. His appearance, the hand-me-down clothes, and his beat-up old car were constant reminders of the life he had been forced to live. He had big dreams, but no one seemed to take him seriously. The sound of laughter echoed through the parking lot of the upscale gym he had just joined, the only place that didn't judge him for his lack of a polished appearance. But today, as Nathaniel walked to his car, the laughter wasn't directed at him. It was the group of white men standing by a sleek black sports car parked a few spaces over. Nathaniel felt their eyes on him before he even reached the door of his old Honda Civic. His clothes were simple, a hoodie and jeans, the same ones he wore most days, but he could tell the men were judging him, already assuming he didn't belong. As he unlocked his car and got in, one of the men, dressed in a designer suit and laughing loudly, called out, "Hey, you driving that junk out of here?" The group of men erupted in laughter, as if the comment was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Nathaniel's heart sank, but he kept his face neutral. It was the same old story, being looked down on because of his appearance, his race, and the broken car he had inherited from his late father. He started the engine, trying to ignore the sting of their laughter. Nathaniel had faced worse, but today felt different. He wasn't just another black man in a beat-up car. Today, something inside him burned. Maybe it was the hurt of years of being overlooked or the shame that he was constantly reminded of his status. But for the first time, Nathaniel wasn't going to let them win. The man who had called out to him, Mark, was still standing there, smirking as Nathaniel drove off. As he passed, Mark shouted, "Get that junk out of here before it breaks down again." The words were sharp, like a knife in Nathaniel's chest. He could feel his fingers tightening on the steering wheel. But instead of letting his anger control him, he made a decision. This time, he would show them. He would make them see. Nathaniel drove to a quiet spot on the outskirts of town, an area he knew well. It was where the hidden parts of the city lived, the people who didn't get invited to the parties, the ones whose struggles were invisible to most. But Nathaniel wasn't like the men who laughed at him. He had something they didn't, a future. He parked the car and got out, heading to the trunk. As he lifted it, his heart raced. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. A quiet satisfaction filled him as he reached inside and pulled out the object wrapped in a cloth. A gleaming silver trophy, his father's pride and joy. It wasn't just a trophy. It was the symbol of his father's legacy. The one thing he had left to remember the man who had raised him and taught him how to stand tall, even when the world tried to push him down. His father had won that trophy for a reason. He had worked hard, sacrificing everything to make a life for Nathaniel. And now, it was Nathaniel's turn to do the same. Nathaniel carefully placed the trophy back in the trunk, securing it before heading back to the gym parking lot. This time, when he pulled into the lot, his mind was made up. He wasn't going to cower. He wasn't going to let Mark or anyone else laugh at him again. As he parked next to the black sports car, he noticed a group of men still standing together, their eyes scanning the parking lot. They saw him and exchanged a few words, clearly mocking his arrival. Nathaniel could hear the laughter from where he stood, but this time, he didn't care. He stepped out of his car with purpose, his chest puffed out, the air around him shifting. He walked straight over to Mark, the leader of the group, who was still smirking, clearly waiting for another opportunity to humiliate him. "I'll give you something to laugh at," Nathaniel said, his voice calm but filled with an unshakable resolve. He reached into the trunk of his car and pulled out the silver trophy. The men stared in confusion as he walked toward Mark, who suddenly stopped laughing. "What's this? You think you're going to impress us with a trophy?" Mark sneered, clearly uninterested. Nathaniel didn't flinch. Instead, he held the trophy up high, the gleam of the silver catching the sunlight. "No," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to show you that you don't get to define me. You don't get to judge me by my car or my clothes. You don't get to laugh at me anymore. This is my father's legacy, and you'll show some respect." Mark's face twisted into a mock smile, but Nathaniel could see the doubt in his eyes. The other men around Mark shifted uncomfortably. the laughter dying down. "What do you think you're doing, huh?" Mark said, trying to regain control. "You think you're better than us." Nathaniel took a deep breath, his heart still pounding, but his grip on the trophy firm. "I'm not better than you," he said slowly, "but I've got something you'll never have. The strength to stand up for myself and the courage to make sure that people like you can't get away with treating people like me like trash." Mark's smirk faltered. He looked around at his friends, the smug confidence he had exuded just moments ago crumbling under the weight of Nathaniel's words. The atmosphere in the parking lot shifted, the tension rising like steam. And then, just when it seemed Mark might say something to counter Nathaniel's words, his phone buzzed. Mark glanced at his phone, his face falling as he read a message. The other men gathered around him, looking over his shoulder. Nathaniel didn't need to know what the message said to know that something was about to change. The silence was deafening. And then, Mark turned back to Nathaniel, his face pale. You need to leave," he said quietly. His voice, once filled with arrogance, now sounded small and unsure. Nathaniel stood tall, holding the trophy high. "No," he said with quiet authority. "You leave." As Mark and his friends walked away in silence, the crowd of gym-goers that had gathered nearby started murmuring. It was clear that the power had shifted, and Nathaniel, the underdog, had come out on top. But just as Nathaniel was about to turn and head into the gym, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his heart skipped a beat. The message was from a number he didn't recognize. "We saw what happened. We need to talk. Your father's legacy is about to become something bigger than you ever imagined." Nathaniel's mind raced. He hadn't anticipated this. What was happening? What was coming next? As he stepped into the gym, the doors closing behind him, he knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change, and the truth of his father's legacy was only beginning to unfold. Nathaniel stood there, the silver trophy still held high in his hand, his pulse pounding. Mark's smug smile was gone, replaced by a nervous glance at his phone. The group of men who had once stood confidently beside him now shuffled awkwardly, their pride shrinking in the face of Nathaniel's silent defiance. The gym-goers had started to disperse, but a few lingered, watching as Mark muttered under his breath, clearly rattled. Nathaniel wasn't sure if it was the power shift in the parking lot or the phone message that had struck a nerve, but something had broken in Mark. It wasn't just his car that had been mocked anymore, it was his pride. But Nathaniel wasn't done yet. He had barely processed the mysterious message when his phone buzzed again. He didn't need to look. He already knew it was from the same number. The message had read, "We saw what happened. We need to talk. Your father's legacy is about to become something bigger than you ever imagined." Nathaniel had no idea who he was, but his heart raced in anticipation. Was this a chance at something more? Was it the opportunity to reclaim his family's name? Or was it a trap? Before Nathaniel could reply, Mark took a few steps closer, visibly trying to regain some composure. "Listen, I don't know what your deal is," Mark said, his voice shaky. "But you need to get out of here. You've already caused enough trouble." His voice was still laced with a hint of arrogance, but it was clear that his earlier confidence had been shattered. Nathaniel let the silence hang in the air, the weight of his own thoughts pressing against him. He was still clutching the trophy, but his focus had shifted back to the text. "We need to talk." Who were they? And why had they contacted him now of all times? "I'll leave when I'm ready," Nathaniel finally said, his voice calm but resolute. Mark tried to laugh, though it came out strained. "You think you've won, huh? This is just a minor setback for me." He stepped back, as if trying to collect himself, but Nathaniel saw the way his hands trembled. It wasn't just a minor setback for Mark. It was a major loss of face, and that was something people like him couldn't afford. Just as Mark's eyes flitted nervously back to the group, Nathaniel's phone buzzed again. This time, there was no hesitation. He grabbed the phone and read the message aloud to himself. "Meet me at the address in 30 minutes. It's important. We'll explain everything." The message sent a shiver down Nathaniel's spine. The address listed was familiar, only a few blocks away from the abandoned warehouse district. The last time Nathaniel had been near that area was when his father had passed away. His mind raced. Could this be the break he had been waiting for? Or was this someone trying to use him for their own gain? Mark, sensing Nathaniel's distracted state, let out a low laugh. What, you going to run off now? I thought you were standing your ground. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He knew that Mark was baiting him, trying to make him look weak, trying to push him back into the corner where he belonged. But Nathaniel wasn't backing down. He wasn't that same kid who had been mocked for his old car. He wasn't the kid who had spent his life feeling like an outsider. He was Nathaniel James, and it was time to take control of his own story. I don't need to explain myself to you, Nathaniel said, looking Mark square in the eyes. I'm not running away. I'm walking into my future. Mark's face twitched, and for a moment, he looked like he might respond with another insult. But then something in his expression shifted. Maybe it was the way Nathaniel had spoken to him, or maybe it was the fact that his friends had started to look at him with less admiration and more pity. But Mark just scoffed, turning away from Nathaniel. Whatever, man, he muttered, waving his hand dismissively. Enjoy your trophy. Nathaniel didn't respond. Instead, he turned toward his car and got in. The keys were cold in his hands as he started the engine. As he drove away from the gym, the weight of the situation pressed down on him, but so did the excitement. This was it, the moment where things were finally going to change. The drive was only a few minutes long, but it felt like hours. The streetlights cast long shadows, and as he turned into the old industrial district, Nathaniel's heart began to race. What was he walking into? Who was this person who had contacted him? And why had they chosen now to reach out? He pulled up in front of an old warehouse building. It was as run down as the district itself. Windows boarded up, graffiti covering the walls, and a quiet stillness in the air. Nathaniel hesitated for a moment, then stepped out of the car, locking it behind him. As he walked toward the entrance, his mind ran through every possibility. Was this someone trying to scam him? Or was this a moment of destiny? The door to the warehouse creaked open, and he stepped inside. The interior was dark, but a few lights flickered on overhead, illuminating the space. Nathaniel's footsteps echoed as he walked farther into the warehouse, the sound of his own breath heavy in his ears. Hello, Nathaniel called out, his voice reverberating in the silence. No answer, but he didn't need to be told twice. He knew this was the moment where everything he had worked for could either come crashing down or be redeemed. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from behind one of the stacks of old crates. It was a man in a suit, with an air of authority about him. The man didn't speak immediately, just stood there, studying Nathaniel with a calculating gaze. You're Nathaniel James, aren't you? The man asked finally, his voice deep and firm. Nathaniel nodded. Who are you? And why did you contact me? The man's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. Let's just say I know a lot about your father. More than you might realize. Nathaniel felt his heart skip a beat. His father? What did this man know about his father? Why did it feel like he was being pulled deeper into something much bigger than he had ever imagined? Before Nathaniel could respond, the man stepped forward. It's time for you to know the truth. Everything you thought you knew about your father, about your legacy, is about to change. Nathaniel stood frozen, his mind racing at the man's words. Everything you thought you knew about your father, about your legacy, is about to change. The man in the suit watched him with a quiet intensity, his eyes piercing through the shadows of the warehouse. Nathaniel's heart pounded, every beat echoing in his ears. His father's legacy had always been a source of pride. He had worked hard to build it, to make sure Nathaniel would never have to suffer the way he had. But what if there was more to it? What if his father's legacy wasn't what Nathaniel thought it was? Nathaniel's throat tightened. What do you mean? What do you know about my father? His voice was steady, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. This man knew something that Nathaniel didn't. The man took a step forward, his sharp suit catching the flickering light. Your father was involved in things you won't understand. Powerful people, Nathaniel. People who can shape the course of history. And now it's your turn. Nathaniel clenched his fists, trying to process the words. His father, a man who had always seemed so honorable, had been involved with powerful people. Was this about more than just business deals? Nathaniel had always suspected that his father's rise hadn't been entirely clean. But this was something else. "Who are you?" Nathaniel demanded, his voice rising with frustration. "What do you want from me?" The man raised a hand, signaling for silence. "We've been watching you, Nathaniel. We know you're capable of more than you realize, and it's time for you to take your place." A cold chill ran through Nathaniel's spine. Take your place. What did that even mean? He wasn't sure if this man was a friend or a threat. Was he being groomed for something dangerous? Before he could respond, the man's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then returned his gaze to Nathaniel. "It's time. Let me show you." He turned and walked toward a side door of the warehouse, motioning for Nathaniel to follow. Nathaniel hesitated but then followed, his mind spinning with questions. The man opened the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room filled with old documents and crates. The walls were lined with metal shelves, each one packed with files and papers, some so old they had yellowed with age. A large desk sat in the center, cluttered with papers, and a single lamp that cast a warm glow over the scene. "Sit," the man said, gesturing to the chair in front of the desk. "We need to talk about your father's legacy." Nathaniel's heart beat faster. This was it, the moment when the truth would come out. He had no idea what to expect, but he was ready. His father's secrets had always haunted him, but now it seemed like those secrets were about to come to light. Nathaniel sat, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair. The man in the suit didn't sit down, but instead, he began to pull out files from one of the shelves. "These documents," the man said, laying them out on the desk, "contain everything. Your father was involved in a deal that went wrong. Powerful people wanted control, and your father refused to give it to them. But that's not the whole story." Nathaniel leaned forward, his breath shallow. "What do you mean? What happened?" The man glanced at him, a flicker of something in his eyes. Was it pity? He was betrayed. There are forces at play you can't begin to comprehend. People with money and power, people who can make anyone disappear, no matter who they are. Your father's refusal to play by their rules cost him, and now they want you. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. "They want me." His voice was barely a whisper, the weight of the words sinking in. "Why me?" The man's expression hardened. "Because you're his son. Because you're the heir. And you're the key to unlocking something bigger, something that's been hidden for decades. You're standing on the edge of a world you've never seen, Nathaniel. And once you step into it, there's no going back." Nathaniel stood up, his mind racing. This was too much to take in. He had spent his entire life thinking his father was just a successful businessman. But now everything had changed. His father had been involved with dangerous people, and now they were coming for him. "This is insane," Nathaniel muttered, pacing the room. "I don't want any part of this. I don't want to be involved in whatever this is." The man's gaze softened for a moment, then hardened again. "You don't get to choose, Nathaniel. The moment you accepted your father's legacy, you accepted everything that comes with it. You're in this now, whether you like it or not." Suddenly, there was a loud bang from outside the room. The door slammed open, and another man rushed in, breathless and panicked. "We need to go. Now," the man said, his eyes wide with urgency. "What happened?" the man in the suit demanded, his tone sharp. The new man glanced at Nathaniel, then back at the suit. "The deal, it's happening right now. It's bigger than we thought. They're moving faster than we can keep up." Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat. "What's happening? What deal?" The man turned to him, his face grim. "The same people who betrayed your father. Those people, they're coming for you. They've already started. You need to act now, or it'll be too late." Nathaniel felt a surge of adrenaline. He was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. The stakes were higher than he ever imagined, and the world he had been thrust into was more dangerous than he could comprehend. But just as they were about to leave the room, the lights flickered, the ground shook beneath them, and the sound of distant sirens echoed through the warehouse. Something was coming. Something big. The sirens wailed louder, the sound of approaching danger intensifying as Nathaniel stood frozen, the gravity of the moment settling in. The world around him seemed to spin, like a clock winding down. The flashing lights outside the warehouse mirrored the storm of emotions churning within him. He had been thrust into a world of shadows, of people willing to betray, to steal, to kill just to protect their secrets. And now, he was caught in the middle. The man in the suit, once calm and collected, was visibly shaken now. He turned to the newcomer, a man with wide eyes, his panic palpable. What's happening? What deal? Nathaniel's mind raced, but the answer seemed just out of reach. But the man, he was no longer the cool-headed figure Nathaniel had come to rely on. His voice cracked as he whispered, "The deal, it's happening now. They're moving the merchandise, and if they find out you're still alive, we're all dead." Nathaniel's blood ran cold. Merchandise? He had heard his father's business wasn't entirely clean, but now this? The truth about his father's empire was more sinister than he could have ever imagined. But what shook him to his core wasn't just the revelation that his father's legacy was a dangerous one. It was the realization that he was now the target of the very people his father had once betrayed. His life had just become a ticking time bomb. The room seemed to close in on him. The sirens outside were closer now, and a crash from down the hallway signaled that things were about to escalate. He had to act. But what could he do? He was just one man, unprepared for the storm that was coming. "Get into the car," the man in the suit said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move now, before they figure out where we are." Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He turned and bolted for the door, his mind clouded with thoughts of survival. He didn't have time to process everything, not with the sirens growing louder, not with the weight of his father's legacy bearing down on him. He had a choice now, run or fight. As he sprinted through the narrow corridors, the sound of footsteps behind him was unmistakable. Footsteps that were no longer just from the men who had been guiding him. Footsteps that were coming for him. The enemies his father had made were closing in, and Nathaniel knew the walls were closing in around him. He reached the outside of the warehouse, the cool night air hitting his face. The car, his only hope of escaping the nightmare unfolding around him, was parked just beyond the chain-link fence. But there was a problem. The black SUV he had been told to get into wasn't there alone. The headlights were blinding, and as the vehicle pulled into the yard, Nathaniel could see the figures in the car. Men dressed in black suits, their faces obscured by the shadows. They were waiting for him, and they knew who he was. They knew exactly what he had just uncovered. "Move," the man in the suit barked. Nathaniel didn't need to be told twice. He ran for the car, but before he could reach the door, the men in suits stepped out of the SUV, blocking his way. Nathaniel's chest tightened. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice shaking. "What do you want from me?" One of the men in black took a step forward, his face hard, his voice cold. "It's too late for questions, boy. You've got something that doesn't belong to you now." Nathaniel's pulse quickened. He had no idea what they were talking about, but he knew he couldn't let them take him. Not now, not after everything. His father's legacy was one thing, but this was his life. This was his future, and no one was going to take that from him. In that moment, something inside Nathaniel shifted. He wasn't going to run anymore. He wasn't going to be the pawn in someone else's game. The years of feeling overlooked, of being underestimated, all of that had led to this point, and he was done with it. He turned to the man in the suit, the only person he could trust in this moment. "Get in the car," Nathaniel said, his voice filled with newfound authority. Now, the man hesitated but nodded. The two of them quickly got into the SUV, but the men in black weren't backing down. As the engine roared to life, the figures in black raised their weapons, aiming them at the vehicle. But Nathaniel wasn't afraid. He had been underestimated for too long. He floored the accelerator, sending the SUV tearing down the driveway and into the night, narrowly avoiding the gunfire that erupted behind them. The chase was on. Nathaniel gripped the steering wheel, sweat dripping down his face, but he wasn't going to stop. He couldn't. He had come too far, and there was no turning back now. The men in black were still behind them, their headlights flashing in the rearview mirror. Every second counted. And then, as if the universe was on his side, the figure of a red light illuminated the road ahead. The police. Sirens blaring, blue and red lights flashing. The police were positioned ahead, blocking the road. Nathaniel had no choice now but to swerve, but it was too late. The black SUV slammed into a guardrail, the force of the impact knocking the vehicle to the side. Nathaniel's heart stopped. The car was flipped, spinning out of control. Time seemed to slow as he braced for the inevitable. But as the world around him twisted, he remembered the sound of his father's voice, the warning about betrayal, the legacy of power that was bigger than Nathaniel could have understood. He had inherited more than just the wealth. He had inherited the fight. When the world stopped spinning and the world around him quieted, he looked at the dashboard. His father had left him one final chance to fight. Will Nathaniel survive the crash? Is the fight for his father's legacy over? Or is it just beginning? The truth about his father's empire is out there, and Nathaniel is now more than just a pawn. Will he break free from the grip of those who betrayed him? Or will the forces closing and swallow him whole? What will Nathaniel do next? What do you think happens? Let us know in the comments. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more dramatic twists, real struggles, and stories about justice in our world.